Early January 1945. Dwight Eisenhower sat alone in his dimly lit headquarters, the maps on the table offering no comfort. This was no ordinary battlefield. This was a war of egos, and the stakes were higher than any front line. His British Field Marshal, Bernard Montgomery, had publicly insulted every American soldier in a press conference. To the world, it was arrogance. To Eisenhower, it was a ticking time bomb. American generals were on the brink. Omar Bradley's message was blunt: resign if Montgomery's demands weren't blocked. Patton had already signaled his loyalty to Bradley and his impatience with British posturing. Montgomery, meanwhile, believed the war itself was his to command. He demanded permanent control of two American armies. Two armies, 500,000 men. In Montgomery's mind, it was simple. The North must fall under his command, or Germany might endure longer. For Eisenhower, it was chaos wrapped in a uniform. Every decision he made felt like walking a knife's edge. Fire Montgomery, and the alliance could collapse before victory. Grant his demand, and the American generals might walk out, taking operational integrity with them. One wrong move, one misstep, and the war could unravel from within. On January 7th, Montgomery addressed the press. "I saved the Americans at the Bulge," he claimed boldly. Headlines across the Atlantic erupted. Veterans seethed. Bradley fumed. Every American soldier who had fought through frozen forests felt the sting. Montgomery's ego had struck a second blow, after the bullets and artillery of Ardennes. Eisenhower acted in secret. Drafted orders to remove Montgomery circulated quietly, hours from execution. Freddie Dining, Montgomery's own chief of staff, flew in, revealing the near disaster. A public apology was forced, but the fissures in trust ran deep. 2 days later, Montgomery escalated. He demanded the permanent command of the 1st and 9th Armies. The northern sector was vulnerable, yes, but it was the perfect opportunity for Montgomery to seize glory. Eisenhower knew he could not give in. To do so would risk the resignations of Bradley, Patton, and every American general loyal to the principle that American armies would remain under American command. The war now balanced on a knife edge of diplomacy and pride. Montgomery's next move could ignite a chain reaction that would destroy years of careful alliance building. Eisenhower leaned back in his chair, weighing every word, every possible reaction. He would have to outmaneuver not German tanks, not artillery, but ambition itself. Early January 1945. Supreme Headquarters, Europe. The war raged across frozen forests, shattered towns, and blood-soaked fields. Yet the fiercest battle Eisenhower faced was not against the Germans. It was against ambition itself. Dwight Eisenhower leaned over the table, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the maps of Northern Europe. His mind raced through troop, movements, supply lines, and casualty reports. Yet above all else, a far deadlier threat loomed. Bernard Montgomery, Britain's celebrated field marshal, had publicly insulted every American soldier in a press conference, portraying them as incompetent, indecisive, and in need of British salvation. Across the Atlantic, newspapers fumed. Veterans demanded answers. American generals threatened to resign. The very foundation of the Allied coalition trembled. Montgomery's arrogance was not idle. It was strategic. By claiming credit for the Americans' survival during the Battle of the Bulge, he sought to rewrite history before it was even written. Eisenhower understood the stakes. One misstep could splinter the alliance and hand Germany a reprieve, not from bullets or tanks, but from the disintegration of Allied command. The American generals were furious. Omar Bradley's message was clear: allow Montgomery to seize permanent control of 2 American armies, and I resign. Patton, ever bold, had already pledged his loyalty to Bradley, prepared to act if Eisenhower faltered. The walls of headquarters seemed to close in. Eisenhower could feel the weight of a continent pressing on his shoulders. He was trapped between a volcano of American fury and the cold, calculating insistence of a man who saw himself as indispensable. Montgomery, for his part, was confident. He believed history would vindicate him. The temporary assignment of the 1st and 9th Armies during the Bulge had proven, he thought, his strategic genius. Why wait for Berlin to recognize his brilliance when he could claim it now? For Eisenhower, the danger was clear. The armies were not just tools of war, they were pawns in a high-stakes game of pride and ego. January 7th. Montgomery strode to the press, the cameras flashing like gunfire. "I saved the Americans at the Bulge," he proclaimed. Across the United States, veterans organizations erupted. Soldiers who had endured frozen nights, hunger, and death felt the sting of betrayal. The words were not merely arrogant, they were incendiary. Bradley, outraged, prepared to resign. The alliance teetered. In a quiet office, Major General Freddie Dining, Montgomery's own chief of staff, uncovered the truth. Eisenhower had drafted orders to relieve Montgomery of command. Montgomery's career hung by a thread, and no one but Eisenhower held the scissors. Dining returned, forcing a public apology from Montgomery on January 8th. Humiliation disguised as diplomacy. Montgomery complied, but trust, once fractured, does not mend with words alone. 2 days later, Montgomery escalated. He demanded permanent control over the 1st and 9th Armies, arguing that a concentrated northern offensive toward the Ruhr industrial region could end the war by May. His reasoning was meticulous, his ambition boundless. He painted the broad front strategy as wasteful, citing exhausted British and Canadian units, and declared American manpower essential to break German resistance. The tone was polite, but beneath the civility was a threat. Acquiesce or risk destabilizing the entire Allied effort. Eisenhower listened. His response was unwavering. The arrangement had always been temporary. No permanent command. The armies would return to American leadership. Montgomery's vision of a northern thrust into Germany was shattered before it even began. Bradley's stance was unyielding. No American general would serve under British strategic control while Montgomery claimed the victories as his own. Tension crackled like electricity through the Allied command. Rumors of resignation spread. Patton's Third Army, fresh from rapid maneuvers that saved Bastogne, prepared to defend American honor. Churchill intervened by phone, recognizing the crisis as more political than military. A compromise emerged. Montgomery could temporarily retain the 9th Army for the Rhine crossing. The 1st Army returned to Bradley. One army. One fleeting opportunity. Eisenhower's strategy was perilously simple. Give Montgomery just enough to satisfy ambition without endangering the coalition. Yet every day brought uncertainty. Would Montgomery exploit this temporary power to seize more? Could Eisenhower hold the fragile alliance together long enough for victory? As January waned, the First Army officially returned to Bradley on the 17th. Montgomery retained only the Ninth Army, preparing for a massive river crossing, the operation that would test not only his planning, but the cohesion of Allied command. The stakes were now clear. The Rhine crossing would be Montgomery's last chance to wield American power, and every general in the theater knew it. Behind the scenes, Eisenhower observed, patient and calculating. Montgomery's ego was a weapon, but it was a weapon he intended to control. Every briefing, every operational order, every glance at the maps was a silent test. How far would Montgomery push before he fractured the alliance entirely? The end of January 1945 brought no relief. Eisenhower's headquarters buzzed with tension, every message and phone call carrying potential disaster. Montgomery's ambitions loomed over the Allied coalition like a storm cloud, ready to break at any moment. He had one goal: retain control of American forces. Every American general had one goal: stop him. And Eisenhower, aloof, patient, decisive, was caught between two forces powerful enough to fracture the war itself. Montgomery formally met Eisenhower at Supreme Headquarters. The room was silent. Maps spread like battlefield scars across the table. Montgomery spoke with meticulous precision, laying out his vision. The 1st and 9th Armies under his command for a concentrated northern thrust into the Ruhr. German resistance, he argued, would crumble only under unified pressure. He painted a picture of swift victory, of Berlin within reach. His tone was courteous, almost scholarly. But beneath, the calm lay a challenge. Every word was a test of Eisenhower's resolve. Eisenhower listened. Each syllable felt like a mine detonating beneath the fragile coalition. One nod could trigger resignations. One refusal could spark defiance. He could not appease everyone. Montgomery's face was a mask of controlled ambition. Behind it, he plotted. The Northern Offensive, as Eisenhower knew, was less about strategy and more about ego. Word of the meeting reached Patton. His Third Army had raced across France, maneuvering with precision to relieve Bastogne. Patton understood ambition and arrogance. He had lived it. But Montgomery's threats were dangerous. Patton's support of Bradley added weight to Eisenhower's side, but even with allies, the crisis was far from resolved. The compromise emerged. Montgomery would temporarily retain the Ninth Army for the Rhine crossing. The First Army would return to Bradley's 12th Army Group. It was a delicate solution, satisfying no one, fully, yet preserving the fragile balance. Eisenhower knew the arrangement was a tightrope. Montgomery would likely push the limits, and Bradley and Patton would watch every move. The potential for disaster was immense. February and March became a blur of planning and preparation. Operation Plunder, the largest river crossing of the war, was to be Montgomery's proving ground. Engineers worked tirelessly, bridging rivers under freezing conditions. Airborne divisions rehearsed drops over mock German positions. Artillery units coordinated precise barrages. Montgomery's strength was in control. Every detail meticulously planned, every possibility accounted for. Yet even as he orchestrated these massive operations, officers of the Ninth Army noticed unsettling signs. Montgomery's staff discussed post-Rhine operations as if the Ninth Army would remain under British command indefinitely, bypassing Bradley entirely. Rumors spread quietly among American officers. Montgomery might defy the agreed terms. Eisenhower, ever calm, anticipated these maneuvers. He trusted the loyalty and discipline of his American commanders. Patton's Third Army, agile and relentless, prepared to exploit any German weakness. The contrast between British methodical planning and American rapid maneuver warfare could not have been starker. Montgomery's obsession with control clashed with the speed and flexibility of American doctrine. March 22nd arrived. Patton's Third Army reached the Rhine near Oppenheim. Without elaborate planning, he launched a rapid crossing, exploiting German disarray. Casualties were low. The operation succeeded with breathtaking speed. Across the Allied command, tension tightened like a drum. Montgomery's meticulous preparations seemed suddenly vulnerable to the audacity of American action. Operation Plunder commenced the next day. Over 300,000 Allied troops participated. The Ninth Army advanced from the southern sector, British and Canadian forces from the WWII north. Engineers built bridges under enemy fire. Airborne divisions seized critical positions. Artillery obliterated German defenses. By March 25th, Montgomery's forces had crossed the Rhine and secured a foothold. Success was undeniable, but so was controversy. Newspapers reported Patton's earlier crossing and minimal casualties, highlighting the differences in operational approach. Montgomery, praising the Americans, privately seethed. He had not anticipated being outshone by speed over meticulous preparation. Even as the Rhine crossing succeeded, the question lingered. Would Montgomery push the Ninth Army to extend his control indefinitely? Eisenhower had set a trap. Temporary command. One fleeting opportunity. Montgomery's next move would define his legacy and potentially shatter coalition trust. Every order, every discussion, every subtle maneuver carried the weight of immense risk. The suspense was palpable. Allied commanders knew the stakes. One miscalculated step by Montgomery could undo months of diplomacy and planning. Eisenhower's gamble was audacious. Give the ego just enough rope to hang itself. Every general understood it, but no one spoke it aloud. The Rhine awaited, and with it, the ultimate test of ambition, trust, and command. April 1945. The Rhine lay before the Allies like a frozen promise, a river that could mark either triumph or disaster. Montgomery, commanding the Ninth Army, saw it as his last chance. This was the moment he had fought for, not in press conferences, not in maps and briefings, but in the field where American soldiers followed orders he hoped would secure his glory. Yet Eisenhower's carefully constructed limits hung over him like a guillotine. Operation Plunder had succeeded, but Montgomery's ambitions were unfulfilled. He proposed retaining the Ninth Army to complete operations in northern Germany, citing operational necessity. Politically, militarily, and morally, the answer was clear. Eisenhower would not allow it. The Ninth Army's temporary command had expired. Any attempt to extend British control over American forces would fracture the coalition. On April 4, 1945, the Ninth Army officially returned to American command under General William Simpson, reporting to Omar Bradley. Montgomery protested, his voice measured but firm. Military logic required the retention of the army. Yet Eisenhower remained resolute, his compromise already having preserved the integrity of the alliance. The political reality was immutable. American troops would remain under American command. Montgomery's vision of leading a massive northern thrust into Berlin had died, not in battle, but in diplomacy. The press conference, the ego, and the unyielding balance of alliance politics had sealed his fate. He would continue the fight with British and Canadian forces, but the opportunity to command American soldiers, the resource he had insisted was vital, was gone forever. Meanwhile, Simpson's TDU, Ninth Army advanced steadily into Germany, linking with Soviet forces at the Elbe River later in April. Each operation reinforced a simple truth. American armies, under American command, executing American doctrine, were lethal and decisive. Patton's rapid maneuvering and Bradley's strategic oversight had proven more effective than Montgomery's methodical approach. The Rhine crossing, once a stage for potential glory, had instead exposed the limits of ego-driven command. Montgomery's 21st Army Group continued north, liberating Dutch cities and capturing German ports, but without the power he had so desperately sought. Eisenhower's strategy had worked. Give Montgomery just enough rope to hang himself. The Ninth Army's return to Bradley marked the final triumph of prudence, cooperation, and command integrity over personal ambition. By the war's end, the lesson was unambiguous. Montgomery's failure was not against German resistance or flawed tactics. It was a failure of trust, diplomacy, and restraint. Coalition warfare required collaboration, humility, and respect for shared command. Montgomery's ambition had violated every one of these principles. Eisenhower, through careful planning and political foresight, had preserved the alliance and ensured victory in northern Germany would be achieved under American leadership. Patton, Bradley, and the American generals had demonstrated the superiority of rapid, flexible operations. Eisenhower's delicate balance between authority and compromise had held the coalition together, preventing a potential collapse. The Rhine crossing and subsequent advances became emblematic of American operational efficiency, executed with precision, speed, and cohesion. Montgomery's grand designs, the northern thrust to Berlin, the glory of commanding vast American forces, had been undone not by enemy bullets, but by a press conference, political realities, and his own insatiable ego. His opportunity was gone. The Ninth Army returned to its rightful chain of command. By May 4, 1945, German forces in his sector surrendered. The chance to influence the war's final movements had slipped away, leaving him a cautionary tale in the annals of coalition warfare. In the end, Eisenhower's compromise succeeded beyond measure. The alliance remained intact. American armies completed the war under American command. Montgomery's vision of glory crumbled, not through lack of skill, but through overreaching ambition. Victory in Europe was claimed not by one man's ego, but through strategy, trust, and the careful navigation of fragile human and political dynamics. The final victory in northern Germany was a testament to cooperation, discipline, and the unyielding principle that in war, as in life, trust and humility are as essential as firepower and strategy. Montgomery had sought to command the ultimate Allied thrust, but he had been outmaneuvered not on the battlefield, but in the corridors of coalition leadership. The war's end belonged to the Allies, guided by prudence, courage, and the delicate art of command. Montgomery had attempted to seize permanent control of the American armies, driven by ego and ambition. But Eisenhower's strategic and political foresight thwarted his plan. The Ninth Army returned to American command, and Patton, Bradley, and the other American generals ensured the success of the Rhine crossing and the advances into northern Germany. Montgomery's dream of leading a massive northern thrust to Berlin never materialized. His own ego had stopped him.